Okay, so let's talk about utility and virtue. So we are doing a quick comparison of utilitarianism and virtue ethics. The first thing is to notice that they're not completely separate, or it's not true that they're like a stark difference between night and day. Utilitarianism and virtue ethics share some similarities. We will look at the differences after we look at the similarities. But the first similarity is that utilitarianism and virtue ethics are both goal-oriented. They're both goal-oriented. There's a fancy term in philosophy for goal, which is telos. Telos is the Greek word, which refers to the ultimate or final purpose, ultimate or final goal. So both utilitarianism and virtue ethics are directed towards a telos, towards an ultimate purpose. And that ultimate purpose is promoting happiness. Okay, so that's quite a substantial overlap. They are both goal-oriented and they both put a premium on promoting happiness. Okay. And now we will see that it's possible to promote happiness, not in the way that utilitarians do, right? Sometimes students get the impression that the utilitarian pursuit of happiness is the only one around. That's not accurate. So I'm going to introduce some difference between utilitarianism and virtue ethics now. Unlike utilitarianism, virtue ethics does not involve maximization. Okay. So what happens when you take an output-oriented or a goal-oriented perspective, direct the goal or take the goal to be happiness, but not be in the business of maximization at all? What does that look like? Right? So if there's no maximization, there's no aggregation, there's no counting, we don't use the economics type laws of diminishing returns. We don't rank actions in terms of how many units of welfare it produces. So there's none of that. There's still the orientation towards output, and there's still the promotion of happiness as the ultimate goal, but there is no maximization, right? Immediately, I can tell you that if there's no maximization, there is no problem with calculation. So the no time to calculate or inability to foresee the future, that's not going to be a problem, because those problems are tied to the maximizing feature of utilitarianism. Okay, so that's the first point of difference. Virtue ethics does not involve maximization. Instead of focusing on producing the best outcome in terms of maximum net utility or maximum net welfare, the focus is on becoming a certain sort of person. So the focus here is us cultivating ourselves to promote individual happiness and communal flourishing. So what person do I need to be so that I'm able to sustain myself, I'm able to support myself, I'm competent, I have a place in society, and I contribute to the welfare of my society? What kind of person should I be? I should be hardworking, honest, brave, just. All those are virtue terms, right? So those are individual virtues. So the question is, now what should I do in this particular case? Should I donate to charity? Should I not donate to charity? That's a question that Peter Singer was asking. The virtue ethicist will also say, yes, you must donate to charity, but the donation to charity is about cultivating a certain personal characteristic. I want to be a generous person, or I want to be a compassionate person. I want to be someone who is connected to the suffering of others, and more than just connected and aware of that suffering, I do something to alleviate it. Right? So I'm compassionate and generous. So the question is, how can we become a person of a certain sort? So we become happy. So there is alignment between individual happiness and communal flourishing. This insight is also tied to the idea that we are social animals. Many thinkers in virtue ethics take that from Aristotle. Aristotle took human beings to be social animals. So it's not surprising that individual happiness is tied to communal flourishing. The two things go together, not least because we cannot be happy if we are alone. We cannot be happy if we don't have a recognized place in society and nobody else is connected to us. Part of human happiness is relationships, like enjoying a certain status in society, not necessarily on the basis of wealth or brute power, but just the knowledge that there's something useful in the society that I'm doing, and my fellow community members, the people in my street, the people in my class, the people in my university recognize, the people in my org recognize that I have who I am and I have some value here, and I make some contribution. So there is alignment here. The insight is there's a alignment between individual happiness and communal flourishing. So the goal is to cultivate a multi-track set of dispositions that involve rational, emotional, and social skills. So I have here the list of individual virtues. I have mentioned them before. So let's break up this definition because it's quite complex, right? So first of all, virtue is a characteristic of a person that is acquired. Usually philosophers say virtue is a dispositional property. What does that mean? A dispositional property is a property of something that only becomes manifest when certain external conditions are realized, right? So a dispositional property is a property like brittleness or fragility. Certain vase can be fragile, meaning it will easily break, but that fragility will not become manifest until certain conditions, external conditions, are realized. Unless the vase is dropped, it will not break. It will not straightforwardly manifest its fragility, right? So we can have a fragile vase that never breaks because it's never dropped, right? So in the same way, courage is a virtue. It's a property of a person. Courage is not like size and shape. So it's not the size and shape are, or skin color, are properties of a person that are straightforwardly visible. Actually, skin color may be more complicated, but we will not discuss that just now. The idea is that courage is elicited or becomes manifest when there are external conditions outside the person that elicit or demand a courageous response. So a courageous person is not someone who's doing courageous actions all the time, because courageous actions are not required all the time, right? And sometimes, some of the times in your life, different responses are called for, right? So virtue involves this discernment or ability to tell what kind of response is required, and we can call it courageous, compassionate, honest, open-minded, etc. Now, when you look at the dispositional property of a vase, that depends on the microphysical structure of the vase. You can even go so far as the way that the molecules of the vase are organized so that it's brittle, right? Brittleness or fragility are connected to microphysical structures, molecular structure, if you like. The vase has no agency. It did not decide to become fragile or brittle, right? And that's an important difference with virtue as a dispositional property. Virtue is an acquired characteristic. A person is courageous because she chose to be courageous, not just like, I want to be courageous, therefore now I'm courageous. It doesn't work like that. So if you look at the structure behind virtue, it has a psychological structure. So that's a pattern of emotional responses, patterns of thought about certain things that lead that naturally lead to a certain consistent pattern of behavior. So a courageous person is a person who worked on becoming virtuous over a period of time, so that she developed or cherished or reinforced certain emotional responses. She focused on having certain patterns of thought connected to those emotions. And more importantly, she developed a certain set of habits and practices so that she ends up doing courageous actions when they are called for. Right? So multi-track set of dispositions, because it involves reason, emotion, and it has a social dimension. You don't become courageous or compassionate by yourself in a cave, in an isolated mountain, right? But it's in relation to other people. Now, what I do not have here is that the element of motivation or choice. The virtue as a dispositional property of a person is an acquired characteristic, and it's an acquired characteristic that's part of who we are. That's part of the personal identity. It's part of personal identity. Okay. So now that's a brief introduction to virtue, and I hope you're getting some sense of what it's all about. Now let's talk about happiness as understood by virtue ethicists under the Aristotelian tradition. So we are discussing virtue under this tradition initiated by a Greek philosopher, Aristotle. You may have heard of him before. He worked before the present day academic division of labor. So we would say today he was doing biology and psychology and philosophy and all sorts of other disciplines at the same time, because the disciplinal boundaries did not exist at that time. So how did Aristotle understand happiness? If the goal of virtue ethics of happiness, and we're not talking about the GHP, we're not talking about anything connected to economics or welfare or maximum net utility. What does happiness in this perspective look like, right? So first, happiness is an equilibrium point. Happiness is an equilibrium point, and it's something that requires a balance, which is why I have a picture of a bird here standing on one of its legs, and also why I have a picture of a living thing, and a complex living thing at that. So the happiness is connected to an equilibrium point that is analogous to health. Health is also an equilibrium point. It's a state that's dynamic and that's all the time being realized through metabolism, through inputs and outputs, through responses of the organism to its environment, etc., etc. So for Aristotle, happiness is like that. Happiness is an equilibrium point or balance. So first, the happiness, when we talk about happiness in virtue ethics, we're talking about human happiness. We are talking about the good life for humans. Mill's idea about higher and lower pleasures is actually derived from this Aristotelian idea. The idea that we want happiness that's proper to human beings, not proper to pigs, right? That idea is derived by Mill from Aristotelian arguments or ideas. But first of all, Aristotle says the good life for human beings involves different elements. Another way of saying that is, if you imagine an ideal life for yourself, it will have many ingredients. It will involve many things. And I've listed some of those things here. If you imagine the good life for yourself, what will it involve? What will it include? It's actually very easy to come up with a list. It's easy to imagine, if I have my ideal life, best case scenario, how I live my life, what will that look like? What will it involve? Well, it will involve health, physical and mental well-being, wealth. We need material resources to sustain ourselves, to help others, to contribute to the community. That's one element of happiness. We need rest. We cannot be working all the time. Rest comes in combination with meaningful work. And this kind of combination is actually tricky to get right. People talk about work-life balance. That's an equilibrium point also, right? So one of the insights of the ancient Greeks is this. It's very easy to imagine what the ingredients of the good life are. What's very difficult and what requires skill is not just to get those individual elements or individual ingredients of the good life. The trickiest part is to get the different elements of the good life in the right measure or in the right combination. We don't reach the equilibrium point that is happiness because we tend to go too far in one direction and to have too little of something. Right? So some people are inclined to go for too much work, too little rest. Some people go for too much rest and too little work. Sometimes we pursue work at the expense of our health, and that leads to unhappiness. So their insight is that happiness is a complex thing. Happiness, in individual happiness and communal flourishing, it's a complex thing. It has many ingredients. But the tricky part is to get the different elements in the right combination. And like a living being, it is a kind of dynamic thing that you attain at one point and you try to sustain it in a dynamic way. It's not something that you attain and then that's it. Always there's a threat that the balance that you attain would be lost, so that you must continue to work at keeping that balance. So the challenge is to have the different elements in the right measure. And the Greeks had the word for that. It is usually translated into English as happiness, but the Greek word is eudaimonia. Eudaimonia is imperfectly captured by happiness because it doesn't actually refer to psychological states of pleasure. Eudaimonia is about flourishing. It's about a good life in its entirety, like an entire lifetime that is well lived. That's what it refers to, and not just individual bursts of pleasure. Right? So the challenge is to attain this point where you have the different elements in the right measure, and that's what eudaimonia is. So virtue is the skill that allows you to attain eudaimonia. Right? So virtue is a means to an end. Virtue is an excellence, is an excellent quality that allows us, that enables us to become happy. Right? So both eudaimonia and virtue are about balance. They're importantly about finding and maintaining balance. Right? So those are all, that's a phrase that's connected to the term equilibrium. Okay. So you can see immediately that they have a very different perspective on happiness, and they have a very different idea on how to attain it. Okay, let's try to find out some more about this new virtue ethics perspective by looking at what virtue is. I have here a picture of Wang Od, who is well known for making tattoos. So virtue is like a skill. Virtue is a form of excellence. The Greek word for virtue is arete. It literally means excellence. Now, we have here a picture of a woman who is good at something. She is not good at something. She did not become good at this overnight. She practiced this craft, this skill over an extended period, and she is well known for it. And what she knows is not something we can completely capture in a book or in a video or in one infamous case, problematic online course, right? So the skill that an excellent person has is not something that that's transferable, but it may be something that we can acquire. Of course, I'm not talking about the skill of making tattoos. I'm talking about the skill of living our lives well, right? So that's what virtue is, and we'll explore the way that this concept is understood by Aristotle and later Aristotelians. So virtue is grounded in experience. So if you look at skills like making tattoos or giving tattoos to people, if you look at skills like singing, if you look at skills like cooking, if you look at skills like running, those all depend on things like in tattooing, the ink, and here there are tools or implements. With running, it's your body. With cooking, you have the ingredients and you have the tools like the pots and pans and whatever oven or whatever fancy thing you need. But when we talk about virtue like courage, generosity, honesty, it is made out of human experience. It arises out of human experience. That's why I say here in this slide, virtue is grounded in experience. Virtue is an excellent response to something all human beings make decisions about, encounter and make decisions about. For instance, fear. Virtually all human beings experience fear and therefore need to make a decision what to do when they become afraid, when they experience fear. So virtue is the pattern of responses where you respond to this certain experience well, right? So virtue is grounded in experience. Virtue is an excellent pattern of response to a certain human experience, right? And it is acquired through repetition. We don't become brave by doing one brave action. It actually, when one person, we have this temptation to think that a person who does one brave action is brave. That's actually not very wise, because it can be a fluke. The person may have done the brave action out of motivation to do something else, or maybe it was an accident, maybe she was intending to do one thing or whatever, right? But when we talk about the person who has the virtue of courage and who has acquired that characteristic, and that characteristic is part of who she is, that means she repeatedly does certain actions because she has repeatedly made certain choices to become a certain sort of person. And I have here not mindless habit, but mindful practice. That's necessary because the habit is something that is consciously cultivated at a certain point. It may be difficult, especially in the beginning. The habit is difficult to establish, right? But after a while, it becomes almost automatic. But I would say it never loses the element of reflection or and choice, right? So virtue is acquired through repetition. It's not something that you get overnight, or it's not a one-shot deal. Now, here is an interesting point that we need to explore some more and will cause certain problems for Aristotelians. Virtue is a mean relative to us. It is indexed on who we are and what our unique circumstances are like. So virtue is context sensitive. Virtue is a form of excellence that is context sensitive. It is not something that works as a one size fits all. We can say that a person who needs to be brave in a student organization needs to do very different things compared to a person who needs to be brave as a soldier in the battlefield. We can call the excellence in both cases courage, and we can say that in both cases it has something to do with managing fear, but it is indexed on unique circumstances. We cannot expect the brave member of a student organization and the brave soldier to be doing and thinking and feeling the same things, even if they're both managing fear, right? So there's this element of context sensitivity in virtue. And that's very important. And it is something that we will need to think about a lot more. But for now, we shall end the recording on virtue here.